Hey everybody, tonight we're looking at the update for the Necromancer Magicka DPS build for Greymoor. Um, let's quickly pop a potion and look right into the stats. We're at 35k max Magicka, which is huge. Then we've got almost 70k max health, which is good enough. 10k max stamina. Magicka recovery of 1277, but that will go up with one of our skills. Our spell damage is 2600, almost 2700, but that will go way up with all of our sets and skills. And then we've got 53% spell crit, allowing us to use the Shadow Mundus Stone to increase all of our critical damage. We are not a vampire anymore in this patch, because the Ricochet Skull spammable just beats the Blood for Blood spammable for the most part, and just having all of our other abilities being more expensive is not really working well with Magicka Necromancer. So we dropped the Vampirism, 64 points into Magicka. I am running the Witch Mother's Potent Brew Food for increased Magicka recovery to help with sustain. And then for inventory, we are using the Essences of Spell Power, increasing our spell damage, our spell critical, and our Magicka recovery, and giving us Magicka back. Okay, let's have a quick look at the skills. First up, there'll be Ricochet Skull. This just lobs an explosive skull at the enemy, dealing 8k flame damage, and every third cast the damage will be increased. That's our spammable. Looks like this. You just throw the skull, and every third cast, 1, 2, 3, he'll throw it with both hands, and it will do increased damage. Next up is the Skeletal Arcanist. What this does is it summons a Skeletal Mage to fight by your side, and it deals shock damage every 2 seconds to the enemies. Also creates a corpse on death. Looks like this. You summon this guy, and as soon as you attack something, he'll start doing shock damage every 2 seconds. Next up is Mystic Siphon. This is sort of an AoE field, dealing shock damage for over 12 seconds. And also all the enemies between you and the corpse will also take damage. You also restore Magicka over 12 seconds while siphoning a corpse, and while slotted, all of your damage is increased by 3%. So you do need a corpse for that one. Let's quickly create one here. And then it looks like this. This is shock field on the ground that's dealing damage, and everything in between me and the target that gets in the beam will take damage as well. Alright, next up is Stalking Blast Bones. This summons a flaming skeleton from the ground after 2.5 seconds, and it will explode, run to the target and explode, and deal almost 13k flame damage. Every second the skeleton spends chasing the target, the damage will be increased by 10% up to a maximum of 50%. Looks like this, just seen it before. Summon the skeleton and it'll jump at the target and explode and do damage. The next thing we've got is Unnerving Boneyard. This is an AoE. You summon a Boneyard that deals almost 15k frost damage over 10 seconds, and also applies Major Breach and Major Fracture to all the enemies, reducing their spell and physical resistance by 5k. You can also consume corpses on the cast to deal 50% more damage, and your allies can activate the Grave Robber synergy from it, also dealing 12k frost damage. Now, I like this morph better, especially for dungeons and arenas, because you have a source of AoE, Fracture, and Breach. So everything inside of this field will have their resistances reduced, which makes it so much easier and faster to kill trash mobs. Since we're a Magicka DPS and not a Stamina DPS, and we don't run sets like Lucestis that proc off of synergies, I don't really see a reason to run the Avid Boneyard one that would not give you the Major Fracture and Breach, but would give you a synergy. Our sustain on this build is just fine. We don't necessarily need a synergy. At least not one that we provide ourselves. So I prefer the Unnerving one, but if you like taking your own synergies, you can also use the Abbot Boneyard one. And then the last thing we've got, obviously, is the Ultimate Glacial Colossus. This unleashes a Frostbitten Fleshed Colossus, which hits the ground 3 times over 3 seconds, dealing 10k frost damage with each smash, and the final smash stuns all the enemies. And here comes the important part. Dealing damage applies major vulnerability to an enemy hit for 8 seconds, increasing their damage taken by all sources by 30%. So if you run this, and Necromancers at the moment are the only classes in the game that can apply major vulnerability to a target. So you put your Colossus up, and for 8 seconds your whole Trials group, all the 11 other guys, will do 30% more damage on the target. It's very nice for big damage boosts, so you always want to have a couple Necromancers in your Trials group to have a good uptime on the major vulnerability from the Colossuses, just because it makes bosses die a lot quicker. Now, if you were wondering where all of these were from, they're all from the Gravelord skill line. Our complete front bar is all of the Gravelord skills. Alright, let's have a quick look at the back bar. Starting out with Barb Trap from the Fighter skill line. What this does is it deals a little bit of physical damage, but more importantly it grants you minor force, increasing all of your critical damage by 10%. If you do not want to run this because you need to be close for this, I would recommend running this on a target dummy because it's a lot easier to quickly pop the trap than Channeled Acceleration, which would be the other option from the Sigigor, the skill line. You could also run Channeled Acceleration because it also gives you minor force and it lasts longer, 36 seconds, but it does have a cast time, which can kind of screw up your rotation at the target dummy. So in actual content, I would advise you to go with Channeled Acceleration, especially since you also get a little bit of movement speed increase, and Necros are a little bit slower by design. And it lasts longer, and you can just pop it once before a boss fight or before you're attacking Samaja and Clout Wrist or whatever. And then when you have to run around, you can also just reapply it, and you don't have to worry about keeping trap up. However, for the target dummy, Barb Trap would be my preferred choice. Next up is our shield, Harness Magicka. This we need to protect ourselves from incoming damage. Comes from the Light Armor skill line, starts as enemy land, you can morph it to Harness Magicka, and then it will give you a 8k damage shield for 6 seconds. And it will also restore 200 Magicka whenever the shield absorbs damage. Each piece of light armor worn increases the Magicka restored by 33%, which is nice because we are running 5 pieces of light armor on this build. We have Mystic Siphon, just like on the front bar, again on the back bar, only to get the increased 3% damage while slotted. If you are in a group without a healer or in a group that has some trouble surviving, you could go for the Living Death skill line and slot a self-heal like Resistant Flesh in this spot, or the Intensive Mender, which is a ghostly spirit that you summon by your side for 8 seconds that will continuously heal you or the lowest health ally. Keep in mind though that both of these can hit an ally instead of you if there's somebody more in need of heals than you. Next up we have Mystic Orb. This comes from the Undaunted skill line. This summons a globe that deals magic damage to everything it passes by, and allies can activate the combustion synergy, causing the orb to explode for 8k magic damage to nearby enemies, and then restore 4k Magicka or stamina, whichever is higher. This is one of the strongest AoEs in the game at the moment. It looks like this. You just summon this orb and it deals damage to everything that it passes by. Okay, this was a little bit bugged out here. Oh well. And the reason why this is so strong is not only because it has a very high damage output for an AoE, but also because all of your allies can take the synergy and restore 4k Magicka or 4k stamina, whichever they need, if they're a Magicka DPS or a stamina DPS. So running this in Trials group, or having a couple people running this in Trials group, will help sustain out immensely, and you'll get loads and loads of synergies to take. And then the last thing on our back bar that is not an ultimate is the Unstable Wall of Fire. Slam your staff down to create an unstable barrier in front of you, dealing 12k magic damage, 1200 magic damage every 1 second. You can set enemies on fire and do the burning status effect, and then they will take 20% more damage from this ability. Plus, when the effect ends, you deal 6k flame damage because the blockade will explode. Just looks like this. You put this blockade down, and after 12 seconds, it will explode, dealing an extra 6k damage. If you reapply it early, you can make it explode earlier, by the way, just like this. Our ultimate on our back bar is right now Animate Blast Bones. This is a AoE resurrection field, which is very good for progression groups or for dungeon groups that attempt hard modes or speedruns. And this is just a big 28 meters range AoE, 12 meters radius AoE that will resurrect up to 3 players, and then if it consumes other corpses, it will summon blast bones in the area that can attack the enemies. Now, in some cases you won't need this. Say if your trials group is set up very well, and if they're on top with the reses at all times, they're really good with resurrecting other people quickly, you might not need this. Or if you're going for no death runs in dungeons, it's a wasted slot because the point is not to die, so you're not going to have a res ultimate on. And in that case, you can just do the Colossus on the back bar as well, because that play very well with your Necromancer passives. Another option would be put the Colossus on the back bar and put Ice Comet or Shooting Star from the Mage's Guild on the front bar, just for the extra passives from the Mage's Guild abilities. However, I've set this build up so that you don't actually need any Mage's Guild abilities for now, in case you don't want to level that skill line or you don't have the time to. Just put the Colossus on both bars then. Now let's look into skills that can come in handy real quick. As I said before, there's 2 heals, Resistant Flesh, which will also put Minor Defile on you, though. It's a 9k heal, but you'll also, for 4 seconds, get your health recovery and healing received reduced. Intensive Mender is the Ghost Spirit that you can summon by your side that heals you every 2 seconds, which is also a nice thing to have. Obviously, the Destruction Stuff ultimate for AoE situations, because this is quite a bright field with an 8-meter radius. So if you're in a dungeon like, say, Falkreath Hold hard mode, where you have the boss in the middle and all these Atronachs around it, that ultimate might actually come in very handy. The Mage's Guild skill line, it is nice if you do want to level it. You could technically put something like Inner Light on your bar and Ice Comet on your bar, and then play the Colossus on the back bar, like I said before. Degeneration is also an option for a dot. I don't really use this here because I don't see the need for it, since we get all these buffs from our potions anyway. Or Spell Symmetry if you're running really low on Magicka and you're having problems sustaining, which you should not have with this build. But for the dummy, maybe if you're trying to go really fast, that could also be helpful. In case you want to run these skills, you're going to have to get the skill line and level it up, but it is totally not necessary on this build in this patch. Psijic Order, Elemental Weapon is a nice spammable, however the skull did actually turn out to do more damage. And then Channel Acceleration would probably be the only thing worth getting in here if you don't want to run Beast Trap. However, you do not need to level up the Psijic or the skill line just for this skill. You can also just run Beast Trap. Alright, so much for that. Now let's quickly get into the passives. I'll start with the race just because I skipped it by anyway. We are a high elf on this build because whenever we activate a class ability, we restore 600 magic or stamina. This can occur every 6 seconds, and we're pretty much only running class abilities on our front bar. Plus, whenever we're using ability with a channel or cast time, you take 5% less damage, which comes in handy if you tend to use channel acceleration, for example, from the Psijic skill line. Then also we've got 2000 more max Magicka than other classes, and our spell damage is increased by 258. So for DPS output, this is the top race, the High Elf. The next best thing would be Dark Elf. You're just missing out on the spell recharge passive, but you have almost the same spell damage, a little bit less, and almost the same Magicka. And other races you could run on it would be Khajiit for more crit, or Breton for better sustain, though Breton does not offer you any damage bonuses. It only offers you sustain bonuses and Magicka bonuses in the passives. So High Elf top race, followed by Dark Elf, and then Breton and Khajiit. Now let's have a look at the passives, because they're very important actually to understand how this build works. Whenever your Blast Bone, Skeletal Mage, or Spirit Mender dies, the cost of the next one is reduced by 50%. So this skill here costs 1944 Magicka. However, if you reapply it when it dies, it will only cost half of it, which helps a lot with the sustain too. So you just gotta keep these things in mind when you're doing your rotation, and you won't waste any Magicka. Death Knell increases your critical strike chance against enemies under 25% health by 10% for each Gravelord ability slotted. We've got all of them on the front bar, so we have a 60% critical strike chance bonus in our execute, which makes us build super strong in execute, because all of our sets give us so much spell damage, and then we get all this crit chance. December, while a Gravelord ability is active, your physical and spell penetration is increased by 1500. That's also very important, because we always have the Arcanist, or the Boneyard, or the Siphon, in best case scenario, all of them up. So that means we always have 1500 spell penetration, which means we don't need to put any champion points at all into spell penetration. And then Rapid Rot increases your damage done with damage over time effects by 15%, which is also very nice. For the Bone Tyrant one, since we're not actually using any skills, we do not need the two in the middle, because they are only they only apply if you actually use Bone Tyrant abilities. But we do want Death Gleaming whenever we are in combat and an enemy dies within 28 meters of us. We restore 200 Magicka. So for trash pools, that helps out a whole lot with our sustain, though it's only with a Bone Tyrant ability slotted. So you could technically use Bone Armor on the back bar, or Bitter Harvest if you wanted the extra ultimate gain. That's why I got this passive in the first place, because I used to run the other morph of Bitter Harvest that lets you like Siphon ultimate from corpses, but I dropped it in favor of running Mystic Siphon on the back bar as well. However, it is still a possibility, and that would help you out with your sustain then as well, on your back bar only though. Last Grasp, however, is very, very important. You gain an extra max health, just an extra 1250 max health, which makes it easy for us to run the Witch Mother's Food and still be at almost 17k health, which is good enough for all the trials. Curative Curse then, while we have a negative effect on you, our healing done is increased by 8%. That comes in handy if you plan on using one of these abilities. Near Death Experience, this plays with your critical strike chance for healing abilities, which can also be nice. It's not completely necessary, but if you do want to slot a self heal, you want to make your critical heal stronger, so you can get it. These two are the most important though. When you use an ability on a corpse, you generate 10 ultimate. This can occur every 16 seconds, so every 16 seconds you just get a random 10 ultimate. And then while you have your Skeletal Mage up, which is the ability we're running, your Magicka and Stamina recovery is increased by 200. So you'll see this in our character sheet. We've got mag recovery of 1111 right now. If we put a potion on, it'll go up to 1277, and we always want to have the Mender active, and it'll go up to 1585, which is a lot better. So you need to make sure to have your potions and your Mender active if you don't want to run out of resources. The spell is actually fine for sustain. If you can't sustain, you're most likely doing something wrong with the skills, or you're letting your Mender or your potions drop off too often. Okay, so much for the Necro passives. You obviously want all of the Destruction Staff passives, because that's our main weapons on front and back bars, so that's very important to have. All of the light armor ones. Medium armor, you only need this if you run Beast Trap. If not, you can leave this one out. But you do want Windwalker and Athletics for increased movement speed, reduced roll dodge cost, and more stam recovery. It's just nice for movability. And then you want the first three from the heavy armor skill line, just to get a bit more health recovery, max health, and physical and spell resistance. Fighter's Guild, if you run Barb Trap, you'll want all of these except for the last one, because that's only Cyrodiil. If you do not run Barb Trap, you would still want to get the Banish the Wicked one to get 9 ultimate whenever you kill an undead Daedra or werewolf. Mage's Guild. If you plan on using any of these abilities, or just want to have the skill line slotted, I'd advise you to get all of them, because they're all very good. They will increase your Magicka recovery, your max Magicka, the duration of the abilities, reduce the cost of the abilities, and will grant you Empower to the damage of your next light attack when using one. However, it's not necessary. Psijic, if you do want to use Channel Acceleration, you'll want to get the passives as well to make it cheaper. And then Undaunted, very important. Whatever build you're running, always get both of these passives, because we get 6% more max health, stamina, and Magicka with this one, which is very nice. And then when we take an ally synergy, we restore more of our resource spec, which is also very nice. You don't need anything from the PvP skill lines. Obviously, you want all of your racial passives. And then you want the medicinal use one, which makes your potions last longer, meaning you can have a full uptime on it. Okay. So much for the passives. Let's get into the gear now. We are still running exactly the same gear that we ran when I first put this build up. However, 2 of the sets we ran since then got buffed. So happy days. Just randomly got stronger without having to change anything. The first set we're running is Scathing Mage. This drops in Imperial City Prison. You want an Inferno Staff on the front bar and jewelry, and this will add max Magicka, spell critical. That's how we get to the 53% to allow us to use the Shadow's Mundo Stone. And then when we deal direct damage, we have a 20% chance to increase our spell damage by 500 almost for 5 seconds, which can occur every 5 seconds. So you could possibly, if you get lucky, have 100% uptime on this, because we do deal a lot of direct damage. Before Harrow Storm, this 5-piece bonus said when you deal critical damage you have a chance, but now it's just direct damage, so now you don't even have to crit anymore. You just randomly get spell damage bonuses by doing normal direct damage, which you're doing anyway. So this got a very nice buff. It's stronger now than it has been before. You want the Inferno Stuff in Precise with a flame damage glyph, and you want your jewelry in Bloodthirsty with spell damage glyphs. The Maelstrom's Inferno Stuff is our backbar weapon. This is very easy to achieve in Greymoor because it also drops from normal now. So you want it infused with a weapon and spell damage glyph on it. And what it does is your light and heavy attacks deal an additional 1341 damage to enemies in your Wall of Elements. Meaning as long as your Wall of Elements is down, your light attacks and heavy attacks will do more damage. Next set we're running on the buddy is Succession. This comes from actual Maelstrom Arena. So while you're going in there on normal now to farm your Inferno Stuff, you might as well pick these pieces up. What they do is add max Magicka, spell damage, and whenever you deal Flame Shock or Frost damage, you gain 531 spell damage for that element for 4 seconds, and it can also occur every 4 seconds, so you can also have like 100% uptime on it. Plus you can have multiple different elemental buffs active simultaneously. Now you'll see that here. When I'm dealing flame damage with the Ricochet Skull, for example, I get a little red circle under my feet. So now for 4 seconds all my flame damage gets 500 spell damage buff. Now if I'm dealing ice damage, I'll get a little white circle under my feet. Now all my ice damage for 4 seconds will get a spell damage buff. And I can have multiple of those active at the same time. If I'm doing the Mystic Siphon, I'm dealing shock damage, so I get a little blue circle under my feet, meaning for the next 4 seconds I will get all my shock damage, spell damage increased by 500. So this just makes you so much stronger, and you don't even see it in the tooltip. So the actual spell damage we have with our potion on was 2600. Now it's 3280, but that's because Scathing Mage procced. The other things from Elemental Succession just counts towards one element, so you don't even see that in the character sheet. But if you do it right, and if you pull your rotation off right, and you always get the 500 for each element, your spell damage is pretty much going up to 3700-ish or so. So it's insane. It's like a lot of spell damage, while you're still able to have over 53% crit chance and run the Shadow Mundo Stone. And the last set we have on got buffed as well. This is Ilumbris. What this does is it gives you 1000 Magicka bonus, plus when you deal flame shock damage you have a 10% chance to summon a meteor shower of that type of damage that deals 1500 damage to all enemies within 4 meters every 1 second for 5 seconds, can occur every 8 seconds, so it has a 3 seconds downtime. However, in Greymoor this set is also getting a buff. The meteor showers now can come at the same time. So let's see if we can quickly proc that. There's the lightning one. Come on, give me flame one. There's a flame one. And you can proc the lightning and the flame one at the same time. Didn't work out right now, but it's possible in Harrowstone. It won't be possible anymore in Greymoor. So it might look like it's been nerfed, but it's actually been buffed because the damage that it deals goes up to over 2k now, plus the proc chance is no longer 10%, it's 33%. So though you cannot have flame and shock on at the same time anymore, you have like a 33% chance instead of a 10% chance to make it happen, and when it happens it deals over 2k damage, not just 1500 AC there. So still very strong, probably one of the better AoE sets right now for Magicka DPS. And yep, still the same gear. That's still how it goes. Obviously you want one piece of Illumbris in medium, the other in heavy. I've got a heavy helmet here, medium shoulders, and then Succession is all light, but you want everything in Divines with Magicka glyphs on it. You want the jewelry in Bloodthirsty with spell damage glyphs on it. And you want this one in Infused with a weapon and spell damage glyph, and this one in Precise with a flame damage glyph. So much for that. If you wanted to swap these sets out for something, it will kind of destroy the point of the build. But obviously you could go with the more meta-ish setup, which would be False Gods on the body, Maw of the Infernal as monster set, and then Ceroria on the front bar and jewelry. That is definitely an option. You'd still use the rotation the same way, which we're gonna get into now. So really easy. What you want to do is back bar, Mystic Orb, light attack, Barb Trap, light attack, blockade, swap, and then your front bar will be 1 Blast Bones and 2 skills. So Blast Bones, Ricochet Skull, Arcanist. Blast Bones, Ricochet Skull, Siphon. Blast Bones, Boneyard swap. So it's always a Blast Bones and a Ricochet Skull, and then the Arcanist or the Siphon or the Boneyard. Blast Bones, Ricochet Skull, Arcanist. Blast Bones, Ricochet Skull, Siphon. Blast Bones, Boneyard swap. Your ultimate, you'll just pull instead of one of the Ricochet Skulls if it's ready, so just don't go Blast Bones, Ricochet Skull, Arcanist, go Blast Bones, Ultimate, Arcanist. Yep, and then the back bar, as I said, just Mystic Orb, Barb Trap, and Blockade. Now we'll quickly have a look at the champion points, and then we're done with this. That's just a general setup because Red CP changed from trial to trial. 72 Ironclad, 16 Spell Shield, 56 in each Hardy and Elemental Defender, and 51 in Thick Skinned, 19 in Quick Recovery, 44 in Warlord, 75 in each Arcanist and Tenacity, 20 in Shadow Ward, and 56 in Tumbling, 56 in Elfborn, 64 in Elemental Expert, none in Spell Erosion because we got the Necromancer passives from the Gravelord ability, 9 in Staff Expert, and 66 in Master of Arms, 72 in Thaumaturge, and 3 in Piercing. That way you'll have all of the passives like Butcher, Exploiter, and Arcane Well enabled. And yeah, that's how the build works. I hope you're having fun with it, and I'll see you next time.